The church officially began in Indonesia with the opening of the Indonesia mission in 1970. And the first missionaries there. There were 6 missionaries that came off the plane, and it started very small. It was very difficult to kind of get the roots of the church established there. But there was some great help from, I can't remember their names, but there was this American couple who had spent a lot of time in Indonesia and were members of the church, and they kind of helped introduce the missionaries to various people and get the church growing. Foreign missionaries were there until about 1980, when there was some political turmoil such that the Indonesian government forbade us from having foreign missionaries there, so we were only able to call local missionaries. So that continued up through about, I think it was in the year 2000 when that changed. And what happened was there was a man running for the presidency of Indonesia. His name was Abdul Rahman Wahid, but he went by Gustor, which is a little bit easier to say. And he was having some eyesight trouble, so he and a friend of his named Alwi Shihab came to Salt Lake City, because there's a very world-renowned eye care center there. And while they were here, President Hinckley and President Packer invited them to have dinner, so they spent some time together. And Gustor, at the end of his trip here, said to President Hinckley, "When I'm elected president, I want to invite you and President Packer to come to Indonesia and have dinner with me in the presidential palace." Sure enough, he won the election, and he invited President Hinckley and President Packer to come, and they went. So they went to Indonesia, they had dinner in the presidential palace, and towards the end of their time there, Gustor came up to President Hinckley and said, I've had a wonderful experience with you here. Is there anything I can do to help you? And President Hinckley's response, as I'm told, was, he first went and he consulted with the local Area 70, like, what does the church need? And the answer was, we need foreign missionaries back. So President Hinckley asked Gustor, we would appreciate it if we could have foreign missionaries come back to Indonesia. Well, Gustor, he was devout Muslim, but great friend to President Hinckley and President Packer, and he, prior to being president, had been the head of the Department of Religion for Indonesia. So he said, I'll see what I can do. And pretty soon we had visas for foreign missionaries to go back in. And that inroad has been a wonderful help to the church, not just in our kind of our image in Indonesia, but also in the humanitarian efforts we're able to handle. Gustor has since passed away, but Alwi Shihab has remained a friend of the church. I remember when President Hinckley passed away, President Packer remarked that the first condolence that he received was an email from Alwi Shihab. And anytime there's a natural disaster in Indonesia, one of Alwi Shihab's first things is to say, okay, he'll meet, because he's a political leader, he'll meet with the other, like their equivalent of the Congress, and they'll be like, okay, what do we need to do? And his first response is always, get LDS Charities. They know what they're doing. We need their help. And so we've enjoyed a great partnership between LDS Charities and Islamic Relief when it comes to relief efforts over there. There have been, with earthquakes, with the Boxing Day tsunami in 2005, we were able to do great things because of the help and assistance and brotherhood that we enjoyed with Islamic Relief. Being a missionary in Indonesia, like getting off the plane, going into the city, you quickly realize that you're in the minority, not just because you're Mormon, but because you're Christian. Indonesia is the fourth most populous country in the world. They've got about 250 million people, and 86 to 88% of those are Islam. But one of the lessons I quickly learned is that a lot of what we understand about Islam and about Muslims over here in the United States from the media is pretty biased and not accurate. It focuses a lot more on the negative. I love the Islamic people of Indonesia. 9 times out of 10, the Muslims were kinder to me than the Christians. Christians would be, a lot of the Christians, not all of them, but a significant portion of the ones I encountered would be like, oh, you're Mormon? You worship Satan. We don't want to talk to you. I was told all sorts of crazy things. We drink baby's blood for the sacrament. We worship an invisible snake. That was my favorite. That's the reason we don't have crosses on our church, because there's an invisible snake on top of the building, and that's what we worship. Oh, interesting stories. But most of the time when I would encounter Muslim people, it'd be like, cool, you're Mormon. What do you believe? And I'd explain our beliefs. They'd be like, cool, this is what we believe. Let's be friends. there's a great amount of tolerance between Christian and Islamic people in Indonesia. A lot of families will have members of both religions, and they'll get together for the Islamic holidays like Eid al-Adha or Eid al-Fitr, and the Christians will come over to the Muslims' house, and they'll have the traditional Muslim feast food, and they'll celebrate together. And then when Christmas rolls around, the Muslims will come over to the Christians' house and eat the traditional Christmas food. There are exceptions. I had a couple run-ins with some Islamic extremists that there were a couple of punk kids who were Islamic extremists, and they rode past my companion and I one day on a motorcycle, hit me in the face with their shoes. Like one of them swung his track shoes at me as they rode past, and they rode off screaming, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar." And one thing to understand is in Asian cultures, especially Southeast Asian cultures, showing someone the bottom of your foot is akin to flipping someone off over here. So you're taught very quickly over there. You never sit like this because you're flipping someone off. You cross your legs like this. And a person's head is sacred, because in a lot of the traditional beliefs of Southeast Asia, that is where the soul enters and leaves the body. And it's such a part of the culture that when we would give priesthood blessings, we first had to apologize because we were going to be touching this person's head. So when these two punk kids came by and smacked me in the face, I mean, I was laughing because I thought it was a cool mission story, but it was an incredibly offensive thing to do. So the important thing to understand is that every group of people is going to have bad eggs and good eggs. But the vast majority of the Muslim people over there I met were wonderful, kind people, tolerant and loving. My favorite experience is when I served in the city of Surabaya, there was a deli, or not a restaurant, that this woman and her husband owned. They were both devout Muslim. He went to the mosque every day for the ritual prayers, and she loved the missionaries. Anytime we went over there, she's like, "Oh, elders, it's wonderful to see you. Came down, chatted with us." One time, my companion and I were getting close to the end of the month. We didn't have a lot of money left. We were kind of hungry, or we were thirsty. So we went over and we said, we don't have we're kind of low on funds, so we just want to order some drinks, chat with you. And she's like, no, you're going to have a meal. So she cooked us a free meal. Wonderful woman. And while we were sitting there eating this wonderful free meal that she just made for us, her husband walks in and he says in perfect English, "You guys are Mormons, right?" And he'd apparently come over and done a study abroad in New York in the 1980s. So he was fluent in English, and he sat down. He was like, "I like you Mormons because there's a lot of things that you guys believe that we value too, and that we believe too." The vast majority of the Muslim people over there, they're God-fearing people. They prioritize families, service to others. They're wonderful, wonderful people. And some of the best friends I made over there and some of my best memories were interacting with Muslim people. Not a lot of them are necessarily receptive to the teachings of the gospel, which is fine, because they're good people. And as we know, in the spirit world, there'll be opportunities for people to learn beyond what they learned here. But they were wonderful, kind people. So the church in Indonesia has been growing pretty steadily since 1970, especially since we were able to get foreign missionaries back in there. When I served from fall of 2008 to fall of 2010, and when I came home, there were 4 districts in Indonesia, 3 on the island of Java, and then one that encompassed 3 branches, one on Bali, one on Sulawesi, and one on Sumatra. Since I've gotten home, that's been expanded to now where 2 of those districts have become stakes, which is really cool. That the saints there are now able to have access to patriarchs and to stake level leadership. The church buildings that we have there, most of them were built in the mid 80s, I think, and they're gorgeous buildings, lovely buildings. They definitely stand out. Indonesia, especially Java, because there are so many people there. It's an island about half the size of Utah, half the land area, and has about 200 to 220 million people. So it's really compact there. There's not a lot of space in the big cities. But our church buildings always have just a little bit of a garden out front or some sort of green area. So they're beautiful buildings. And when I was there, at least, Indonesia had the highest activity rate among the members for all the Southeast Asian missions. We usually had about 40 to 50% of members that were on roll would come to church each Sunday. Saints themselves are good people. There's a lot of longtime members, a lot of pioneers that have kind of formed up like the pillars and the foundations of the church, and that's definitely expanding with their children and grandchildren going on missions, marrying within the church, raising children. Yeah, church is strong there. It's growing. It's not necessarily the most fertile of ground for the church to grow. I mean, we aren't like baptizing a steak a week like in some of the South American missions, but the saints that are there are strong people. They're spreading the gospel through their friendship, through their kindness. We're well known for providing service in the wake of disasters, and generally the church is has a good image with the people of Indonesia. The church itself is only on 4 of the islands of Indonesia, where the vast majority of members and missionaries are on Java, but then we've got a branch in Sulawesi, a branch in Bali, and a branch in Sumatra. But I only ever served in Java